The young and the restless spoilers, Phyllis Summers paced frantically, her mind racing with fear and frustration. She couldn't believe what was happening. Her son, Daniel, was being framed for a murder he didn't commit, and the real killer was still walking free. Sharon Newman, the woman Phyllis had always despised, was out there, living her life without a shred of remorse while Daniel's future hung in the balance. But Phyllis wasn't just angry at Sharon. She was furious with Nick Newman, the man who held the key to Daniel's freedom but refused to act. Nick had evidence that could expose Sharon as the real murderer, but he was keeping it to himself, allowing the lies to pile up while Daniel suffered. Phyllis knew Nick wasn't a bad person, but this betrayal, this silence, was something she couldn't forgive. Time was running out, and Phyllis needed Nick to do the right thing before it was too late. Phyllis's desperation. A mother's plea, "Nick, you can't keep this secret any longer," Phyllis pleaded, her voice trembling with emotion. "Daniel is innocent. You know it, and I know it. How can you stand by and watch him go to prison for something he didn't do? You have to tell the truth." Nick stood across from her, his expression conflicted. He had always cared for Phyllis, and he knew how much this was tearing her apart. But it wasn't that simple. The evidence he had, proof that Sharon had killed Heather, was a double-edged sword. Exposing Sharon would save Daniel, but it would also destroy Sharon's life forever. She was the mother of his children, and no matter how complicated their relationship had been, Nick didn't want to see her behind bars. "I know you're upset, Phyllis," Nick said, his voice low, "but you don't understand. If I hand over this evidence, Sharon will go to prison. The kids will lose their mother. Faith and Noah. What will they think of me if I do this?" Phyllis shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "Nick, I get it. You love your children, and you don't want to hurt them. But what about Daniel? He's my son, and he's about to be locked up for the rest of his life for a crime he didn't commit. How can you live with yourself, knowing you could have stopped it?" Nick's internal struggle, torn between two worlds. Nick knew Phyllis was right. Every word she said cut deep, because it was true. He had been struggling with this decision for weeks, unable to sleep, haunted by the knowledge that he could end this nightmare for Daniel with a single action. But the thought of putting Sharon, the woman he had once loved and the mother of his children, in jail was too much to bear. Sharon had confessed to him in a moment of vulnerability, telling him she had killed Heather, but it had been an accident. She had been terrified and confused, and instead of coming forward, she had hidden the truth, hoping no one would. He thought about Faith and Noah, his children who had already been through so much. They adored their mother, and the idea of shattering their world again weighed heavily on him. If he gave Phyllis what she wanted, Sharon would go to prison, and the kids would never forgive him. But if he stayed silent, Daniel would take the fall for Sharon's crime. It was an impossible choice. "Phyllis, I don't want to lie anymore," Nick admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But you don't know what you're asking me to do. This isn't just about Sharon. It's about our kids, too. How do I explain to them that their mom is a murderer?" Phyllis's face hardened. "They'll find out eventually, Nick. Do you really think you can keep this from them forever? Lies have a way of coming out, and when they do, it'll be even worse. They'll hate you for keeping this secret, just like I will if you don't help Daniel now." The weight of deceit, lies, and consequences. Nick had always prided himself on being a man of integrity, someone who did the right thing even when it was hard. But this was a level of deceit he wasn't sure he could handle. Sharon had manipulated the situation so perfectly, leaving no trace of her involvement in Heather's death. And now, with Daniel on the chopping block, Nick had to face the consequences of her actions and his own inaction. He thought about Phyllis, standing there, her eyes filled with desperation and anger. She was right. He couldn't let Daniel go to prison for something he didn't do. But handing over the evidence felt like a betrayal of everything he had ever believed in. How could he turn on Sharon, knowing what it would do to their family? Phyllis's voice broke through his thoughts, sharp and unrelenting. "Nick, being a liar isn't something you can hide from. Sharon has always lied to you, to everyone. But you're better than that. At least, I thought you were. If you don't tell the truth now, you're no better than she is." Nick winced at her words. Phyllis had always been brutally honest, and in this moment, her honesty cut him to the core. Was she right? Was he becoming a liar by default, allowing Sharon's deception to continue unchecked? He had never thought of himself as someone who could live with this kind of guilt, but here he was, trapped in a web of secrets. Nick's impossible decision. Love or justice? As the weight of the situation settled over him, Nick realized there was no easy answer. If he exposed Sharon, he would be saving an innocent man, but at the cost of tearing his family apart. If he stayed silent, he would be complicit in Sharon's crime, allowing Daniel to pay the price for something he didn't do. Either way, someone would suffer, and there was no way to avoid that. Phyllis, sensing Nick's hesitation, stepped closer. Nick, I know you're scared, but think about it. If you don't do this, Daniel will go to prison, and you'll have to live with that.